Welcome to Writing for Healthcare Administration, discussion posts and PowerPoint presentations. I'm Julie Johnson Archer with the Online Writing Center here at ACU Dallas. And also in the room is Dr. Hope, Program Director of the Healthcare Administration Program. And so if you have questions throughout this webinar, feel free to ask them in the chat room. And I will do my best to answer them, although Dr. Hope is also here. She might chime in the chat room or unmute herself, but that's fine too if you want. But we're glad you could make it. And before we get started, I wanted to mention, for those of you who are watching the recording, this webinar deals with discussion posts and PowerPoint presentations, which are applicable in many, if not all, of ACU Dallas's programs. So if you're not in Healthcare Administration 201, which is the course that we'll be using as an example for a couple of slides in this webinar, then I hope you'll stick around and find what is useful for you as well. If you're new to the Writing Center, I wanted to give you a little bit of information about us before we jump in. If you have not made a tutoring appointment with the Writing Center before, we've got a how-to video linked here that will walk you through those first steps to making your appointment and submitting your paper. And if you're interested in clicking on any of these links, I will be posting the slides to this webinar on the Writing Center's website, along with the recording. So we do this for every webinar each term. You can always find both the PowerPoint slides that you can download and access all of this information and the video recording. So if you have to hop out, don't worry, you can catch the rest of the webinar online. If you do make a Writing Center appointment, you should know that we work with you at any stage of your writing process and with all sorts of writing projects. So if you're writing a discussion post or a PowerPoint presentation, you're welcome to submit those to a tutor and get some feedback. Just today, I worked with someone on a PowerPoint presentation, and so we get all sorts of writing projects. Also, you don't have to have a completed paper. So if you just have an outline or you're just beginning and you'd like some input before you get too far in writing the paper, that's fine too. If you sign up for an appointment on our schedule this term, the default appointment type is asynchronous appointments. And so what that means is that you don't actually need to show up at the time of your appointment. All you need to do is make sure you've uploaded your paper by the time of your appointment. That way the tutor can look over your paper and your tutor will send you feedback via email within 24 hours. And so check your ACU email inbox for Writing Center report, an email titled that, and it will contain your feedback. If you know that you would like some real-time conversation with a tutor via phone or Zoom, you can always request that, and you can email our whole team at onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu. And if you do, make sure you try and include a few available windows for you, and that way one of our tutors can be more likely to match your schedule and get that set up quickly. We also have a lot of resources and blog posts, sample papers, etc. on our website. So if you haven't checked out the Writing Center's website, I hope you will. You can access that from any course in Canvas on the left-hand menu. So in a nutshell, the submission process, if you are going to make an appointment with the Writing Center, the first thing you need to do is schedule your appointment in WC Online, and that's our scheduling website. You can access it from the Writing Center's homepage. And once you do that, you should receive a confirmation email. So just make sure that you have successfully created the appointment. That way your tutor knows to go looking for your paper. The second step is to submit your paper to that week's Canvas link. And you can do these first two steps at any time. You don't have to do them at the same time. So some folks have waited until they have a paper ready and they go and try to make an appointment, and our schedule might be booked for that day. So you can schedule an appointment up to 2 weeks in advance and work on your paper for all of that time. And then just anytime before the actual appointment date and time, make sure you've submitted something for the tutor to look at. And you're also allowed 2 appointments per week. And we follow ACU Dallas's schedule. So that would be between every Tuesday and Monday, you can have 2 appointments. And then that last step is for you to wait and receive feedback within 24 hours of your appointment time. If you ever have any questions about the Writing Center or how to make use of our services, you can again email us at onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu, and one of our team members will get back to you as soon as we can. Okay, so for this webinar, we've got a couple of key learning objectives that we'll go over. The first is to develop our writing skills for discussion posts. And the second is to learn about creating effective PowerPoint presentations. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. We've got a great question. When I say submit to that week's Canvas link, where is that? That's a great question. When you are signing up for an appointment in our schedule, you're going to find that there's an appointment form. And in that appointment form, you will see 2 submission links that will take you directly to Canvas. So you don't have to go and find us through Canvas, although you can. The easiest way, though, is probably to go through that appointment form. And again, if it's your first appointment of a week, you'll just use the first submission link, and second link is for a second submission. That's a great question. And again, if you have questions about whether the tutor received your paper, maybe you want to double check that you submitted it correctly, you can always email your paper to the tutor, or just check in with the whole team, email the whole team, and we can double check for you as well. Okay, so we're going to dig into writing discussion posts first. And for any writing assignment, especially for discussion posts, one thing to keep in mind is the balance between these 2 things, the personal and the academic. So writing about personal opinions and experiences versus writing about academic resources and research that you're going out and doing and finding. It's usually easier for most students to write about their personal beliefs and the ways that experiences have influenced their ideas. That's true for me. I don't know about you, but if that's all that we do in a discussion post, just this first part, then we won't be fulfilling the assignment instructions, which are to connect our thoughts to the course readings, the research from academic sources that we're using, like journal articles, book chapters, and even scholarly videos. So if you're a visual learner like me, I put together this slide. I hope you'll think about this slide the next time you're writing that discussion post, and imagine if your post were a wave, creating waves, does it ebb and flow between your voice and other researchers' voices? If not, if you find that it's weighing heavily on one side and not the other, try to make sure you have both. And again, this is pretty true for any paper you write, but I find that with discussion posts, it's a lot easier to weigh heavily on personal opinions, and we forget about the academic side. So your professor has some expectations for how these 2 aspects of your discussion post should contribute to the overall class discussion. So let's go over this slide. Sharing your personal experiences and thoughts helps you to give context and real-life examples for your ideas. So if you say, I agree with the reading about how patients should have access to preventative care, but you don't say any more, that's where it ends. That's considered a surface level personal opinion or thought. It's essentially saying, I agree with this. But you go deeper when you add a little bit of context about why you agree. For example, this is something true in my life. Thanks to her yearly mammogram, my mom's doctor was able to catch her breast cancer before it spread too much. She was able to care for that, and now she's living cancer-free. So if I included that detail, that gives a lot more context about why I agree, and that's effective. That's an effective use of personal experience. So again, that not only supports your reasoning for agreement with a piece of the reading, it allows others in your course and your professor to better understand your perspective too, and make connections with you. But if that's all we wrote about, this post would be incomplete. We also need to be in the habit of backing up our ideas with research. Remember, our experiences speak to our life, but they may not always be generalizable or applicable to all situations. And using research to back up our claims is part of becoming a reliable scholar and practitioner in your field. Another word for reliable is credible. So if we're, again, only relying on personal stories and opinions, that is credible in one sense, maybe on a personal level, but as an academic, as a scholar, we cannot be fully credible or believable or reliable without these academic resources as well. So it's a stated requirement in the expectations of discussion posts in most courses that you cite the readings from that week's resources. This is a basic requirement to show that you did in fact read the materials. It's a little bit like high school. If you think back about high school reading quizzes, at some point in your course, you have to prove that you have done the reading, right? So on a basic level, it does meet that requirement. And you can do this by repeating some of the key concepts from the readings and connecting them to your own ideas. Writing about ideas from the readings also helps you go further than skimming the text passively. So in order to write about new or unfamiliar ideas that you're reading, you have to actively engage with the reading, thinking critically about it. After each reading or video you watch, I encourage you to think about what resonates with you. What ideas might conflict with something that you think is true? Sometimes, in my experience, I don't know what I think about a topic, especially if it's a new topic to me, until I start writing about it. So make sure that you're incorporating some of this reflective and critical thinking in your discussion posts and allowing your professor to see you engage with the text in that way. So I've given you some tips for writing discussion posts on this slide, and I'll go over these with you. And we're going to use an example in the next few slides from Healthcare Administration 201. And so we'll go over each of these steps together with that example. Again, this should apply to discussion posts in most any program. So read the post carefully. The assignment instructions are often pretty detailed. If they're pretty open-ended, great, but sometimes there are multiple sections of a prompt, even for a discussion post. And in that case, I suggest that you consider writing any of those directions or questions from the prompt down, or even copy and pasting them into another document, wherever you're taking notes or wherever you're going to write your discussion post. And a side note here, typing directly into Canvas, if you're opening your discussion post and you start typing right there in Canvas, there's a risk of losing your work if that window is open too long. The browser might time out and it won't save your work. I know this from experience, so I do recommend anytime you're writing a discussion post, write your draft of it in Google Docs or Word or somewhere else where you can keep it in case you need to step away and come finish it later. Another tip is to use the same language from the prompt in your response. So if you've got a specific task that you're supposed to do, you can take language directly from that prompt and put it into your response. That will help the professor to see that you're responding directly to this part of the prompt. And again, I'll show you an example here in a second. Look for supporting ideas and quotes in the readings that connect to each part of the prompt. So one tip is to look at the discussion post prompt before you do the reading that week. That way you can have the prompt in mind and kind of go searching for answers and ideas that connect to the prompt when you're doing the readings. I find that if I do the readings and then I come to the discussion post afterwards, I might have missed some of the things that I was supposed to try and focus on in my reading and have to go back and reread or rewatch the videos. So I think this is a time saver if you read the discussion prompt before doing your reading for that week. Another tip is to balance your own ideas with support from course readings and academic resources, like I've mentioned. Include APA citations for any quoted or paraphrased ideas from outside sources. Now, this may not be explicitly stated as a requirement for all discussion posts, but I think it's a really good habit to be in. Every time you cite something in a paper, you're required to have an in-text citation. Even if it's not required, I highly suggest doing this for discussion posts as well. And sometimes it is a requirement. Lastly, respond to others' posts with critical thinking, and we'll get into that again in an example. So let's take a look at week 3 discussion question 1 from Healthcare Administration 201. So if you're in that class, this is coming up and highly relevant to you. So I've copy and pasted these instructions. We've got the purpose, which is to explore the difference between clinical and non-clinical professionals, relating those roles to the aims of healthcare, which are equitable access, quality care, and cost. So the post instructions here, healthcare practices must constantly balance the aims of providing quality care, ensuring access for patients, and controlling costs. These needs might compete or hinder one another as administrators and providers seek to accomplish their respective responsibilities. However, healthcare providers and professionals must work together in order to meet these common goals. So I know you can read these on your own, but I think having them read aloud might help as we go over the example. So we're supposed to review the week's readings and resources, focusing on chapter 6 of the text, and reflect on the various roles of clinical and non-clinical professionals in healthcare, and discuss the struggle of, quote, medicine and management, as described in your text, and discuss the following in your post. So we've got 3 specific things that we have to discuss, and these aren't just suggestions, these are requirements that we answer these questions. So let's go over each of those 3 questions. The first is to differentiate between clinical and non-clinical positions. So in conversation with the program director, she's given some very helpful hints and information for you, especially as it comes to where to find some of this information in the text. So page 181, if you want to jot that down, is where you can find the textbook's answer. And again, if you're reading this in advance of doing the course readings, you're going to be looking for a definition of these terms and looking to include that in your discussion post. And then again, thinking back to my tips, using the same wording from the prompt in your answers. If the prompt asks, using these terms, differentiate between clinical and non-clinical positions, one possible way to answer that using the same language is the main difference between clinical and non-clinical positions is. So it's a simple thing to do, but I find that this is very helpful, whether you're writing a discussion post or a full-on essay. And this will help the professor to see, again, where you're answering each question in your writing. All right, for answering part 2, this is the prompt. Select one of the following aims of the healthcare system: cost, quality, or access, and describe ways in which clinicians and non-clinicians might collaborate to address these aims. Again, a helpful tip for those in the class: see the aim of the healthcare system in your course in Canvas. So there's a whole page about that you might refer to as you're answering this part of the prompt. And in this answer, we're tasked to identify an aim. And so again, using that language from the prompt, the aim of the healthcare system is to ... You can fill in which one you're going to focus on. And then again, the second part of this is to describe ways to address this aim. And this is also information from the program director. There's no one right answer to this question. It's an opportunity for you to share your thoughts and your experiences. So again, blending information from the text and from the course with your experiences is definitely the goal here. So an example might be that administrators might create policies for clinicians to follow addressing quality and safety. Or non-clinicians might create budgets to help clinicians receive new treatment technologies. So these are just examples. You can think of your own, perhaps if you're working in your own healthcare environment, you have another idea of ways that these two parties can collaborate. Then part 3 is to discuss the struggle of medicine and management and relate this to your selected aim. So again, a hint for where to find information to answer this is on page 196 of chapter 6. And keeping in mind the goals of this course, you want to understand that the business side of healthcare and the patient side might conflict, causing struggles in delivering care. So as a healthcare administrator, it's important to think about this in advance. As in any field, think about the potential conflicts that are coming your way if you're entering this field. And then, as part of this section in your discussion post, we want to relate the aim we identified in the previous part, the previous slide, to the struggle of medicine and management. So for example, if you chose to write about access as the aim of healthcare, you could write something like this: we need clinicians to staff medical offices to treat patients. Extending office hours could increase access for patients. However, increasing office hours requires increasing staff and overhead costs. The medical office might not have the funds to cover this additional expense. So this is a great example, I think, you can use as a sample for your own. Think about what works in your context and what doesn't. And how might these two parties conflict? Thinking again of your personal experience here might be the best way to answer this part of the prompt. And then lastly, responding to classmates' posts. And this isn't everyone's favorite thing to do. As someone who's taken some online classes, I sometimes myself even put off this part of the task. And what I appreciated most, though, when I did engage in responding and reading others' responses to my posts, was when other students answered questions that I had, or when they asked me questions in return. So instead of simply reading "great point" or "awesome answer, I totally agree," and leaving it at that, it felt worth my time to read my classmates' genuine questions and answers that were responding to my thoughts and made me feel like my post was actually worth their time too. So I know I'm acknowledging that it's not always the most fun, but they can be really valuable if you make the most of it. So here are some ways that I suggest making the most of it. And this is also from course expectations. So you can ask an insightful and probing question, like I mentioned, that deepens their level of reflection. And I'm giving some examples here. You can steal these. It's not plagiarism. These are just template text that you can think about and revise and tweak to fit your needs. Saying something like, can you say more about how you reached that conclusion? Maybe you disagree with them and you want to hear them really spell out their reasoning a little more, or just starting a question with, what do you think about? And XYZ. Share how research supports or contradicts the posting. So, for example, you might write, this quote seems to explain what you're talking about, and give an actual quote from the reading or videos that you've been watching. That's a great way to engage with the text in an academic way, but you're also engaging the other students. Share a new insight. You can say something like, I never thought about it that way, but reading your post made me realize that. So look for things that are different in others' experiences or ideas, and you can point that out in your responses. You can validate an idea with your own life or work experience. So contributing with personal experience rather than academic is also good. You can say, I agree with you about that because in my experience, again, not stopping at I agree, but giving a more personal example will really help you connect and reflect on a deeper level. Lastly, make a suggestion. You can say, have you considered this other perspective? How would you respond to someone who says this? And those are all great things to do. I hope that you will receive some of these good questions as well, because they do really help the discussion posts help you learn. So got a great question about discussion posts and responses. Are we only required to do in-text citations? That is a really good question. I have a feeling that it's different depending on the course and maybe even the discussion post assignment. You might sometimes be required to post full reference entries. I am not aware that that would be consistent, like you need to always do that. I would suggest always doing in-text citations at the bare minimum. But maybe, again, if Dr. Hope wants to chime in, you might have another different response from me, but that's what I would say about discussion posts.
I agree with you, Julie. In-text citations are always a great starting point, and just check out the discussion prompt. And, it can never hurt to just go ahead and grab that citation, that full APA reference too, just out of kind of make it habit. But I would definitely just check the instructions. Thank you for that great question.
Yeah, that's a good point. Helping you get into the habit of always making references is a great point. Even if I didn't post the full references in my discussion post, in my notes for the week when I'm taking an online class, I will write the full reference entry for a source right above my notes, right above wherever I'm writing the discussion post draft, right? So that's just good for me as I'm going back and I need to find, where did I find this information? I've got the resource right there. So yeah, it's a good habit, and check the discussion post.
Can I give one more quick tip, Julie?
Absolutely.
I always like to keep the APA citation to my textbook or any like learning resources for that week that are used frequently, just kind of write in my Word document as well, just because those are used almost every week or, frequently throughout the week.
Right. That's a great point. If you're interested in learning about resource management, Zotero is a great place also if you want to start using that. At the graduate level is when I really suggest students get into Zotero, but the ACU online library also has a webinar all about how to use that if you are interested. So a little plug for them. Okay, so we're moving now to talking about PowerPoint presentations, but feel free to ask any other questions about discussion posts that you might have. Um, so let's get into making presentations. The first thing I want to mention right off the bat is that you have access to PowerPoint and actually all of the Microsoft Office 360 suite for free as an ACU student. So make sure you're taking advantage of that. And if you don't know how to download that, maybe connect to your student services advisor and definitely make sure that's on your laptop or computer and you're using that resource, because it will go a long way to helping you make these presentations that are part of your coursework. So we're talking about PowerPoint presentations for a few reasons. They are common in ACU's healthcare administration degree program. You're going to see assignments that require you to have a presentation component. They're also common in the field of healthcare administration. So before I talk about that, they're also common in other degree programs. So again, if you're watching and not in healthcare, that's fine. The one I worked on today was from an EDD student, but lots of programs have a presentation component. So they're also common means of communication, as you know, in various fields of work, including healthcare administration, business work, leadership. So it's important to practice these skills in our coursework and hone our skills to use them better in our workplace and enhance our credibility and communication skills. So there are many advantages of using PowerPoints as a presentation tool. For example, they are rhetorically persuasive. They can help audiences follow your arguments and ultimately get them to think or act in a certain way after listening to your presentation. They're also professional. There's certainly a lot of ways you can make your presentations professional and effective, and the strategies we cover today can be applied not only in PowerPoint, but also other things like Google Slides and other visual aid applications you might use. Lastly, PowerPoints, when done well, can be much more engaging than listening to a speaker without slides. I'm a visual learner personally, and ideas tend to stick with me better when they're attached to words and images on slides or on my notes wherever I'm looking. So they're helpful to me. So I have given a writing process for making PowerPoints, and we'll go over these together. We start with outlining and then making the slides, writing speaker notes, and recording the presentation. So some of this may not be linear. You might do this in a circular process, but let's go over these parts of the process and some tips for being effective. So thinking about outlining, just like it's important to get an idea of the organization of a paper, it's helpful to start a presentation with a basic outline. I like to actually make my outline in PowerPoint, so you don't have to open a Word document, outline it, and then go into PowerPoint. The great thing about PowerPoint is they've got titles for each slide, so I can plop a title or a heading in that slide, make a new slide, plop the heading in, and I'm building this kind of bones structure. And at this early stage, if all I'm doing is adding those headings, I can easily rearrange them too. So it's a great way, I think, to make sure that I get all of the required sections into my slides before I really begin filling them out and making the fuller presentation. So here's an example, kind of a template for the outline that I use to build any presentation. I start with a title slide, kind of like a cover page, an APA, and you actually might be required to include all of that information that you usually do for essays in the title slide for your courses. Then I like to give an overview or in this case, you saw me give some objectives. This gives the audience kind of a preparation for what's to come. And it kind of serves like an introduction paragraph in your essays, which guide the reader and give them a forecast essentially of what the whole paper or PowerPoint in this case is about. Then we have the content slides separated by headings, and you can even have subheadings within those sections, and the references slide and a closing slide. So you might not have every single component, but again, this is sort of a template to think about every time you're making a presentation, especially if you're making it for an outside audience. These are really helpful things to make sure you include to grab people's attention and keep it throughout. Just in the last couple of weeks, I got to attend a webinar all about making presentations more accessible. And so some of the information here is actually about making the slides accessible, but it's also about making your information effective for your coursework. Our goal is to make our presentation easy to understand for diverse audiences. So here are some general guidelines. And from the start, I want to say there are exceptions to every rule, and I'm also not the PowerPoint expert. So these are just suggestions to keep in mind, especially if you're unsure where to start. So I'm going to show some examples in the next slide too. So as far as the text on the screen, I highly encourage sticking to bullet points instead of full paragraphs or even just long sentences or sections of text. You can have full sentences, that's fine, but using bullet points is a really great visual. The next tip about the text is contrast. I like using dark text on a solid light background, but you can also use light text on a solid dark background as long as the contrast is there. That's the main thing about making the text easy to read. One tip especially about accessibility is using descriptive hyperlinks when you need to. And what that means, you can see just right here on the screen, rather than providing a full URL, like writing out the whole www link on the slide, you can use something called descriptive hyperlinks, where if you hover over the text, you can see the URL, and I've linked the text that is directive of how or what I'm linking you to. So this is a resource about descriptive hyperlinks. So that's pretty easy to understand, that if I click on that, it'll take me to something to learn more about what is highlighted here. So that's something you might not have to do that in your coursework, but if you're making slides for, again, outside audiences, keep that in mind. As far as the images go, I encourage you not to overuse images, clip art, or other visuals. Keep those to a minimum. And the format and design. Let's just take a look at some examples. I'm going to give you first an example of what I'm going to say you should not do, and second, a more effective version. Okay, so this is using information that we've already talked about, as if we were making a PowerPoint presentation from that discussion post that we discussed. So this might be an exaggeration. I'm not sure I've ever seen students do all of these things in one slide, but take a look at this slide. And if you're interested, you can type in the chat room, what do you notice could be improved, and how might you critique this slide? You're not going to hurt any feelings. I made this just for this purpose. So I'll give you a moment to point out a thing or two that you notice. Okay, so yes, you guys are right on it. So first of all, you can't read the text very well. Again, it's due to that contrast issue. The background being kind of faded in and out. That in itself might not always be a bad thing, but in this case, it makes the text really difficult to read because this middle section, the contrast is just not there. It's busy, absolutely. That is the word I would use. And also, you said distracted by the moving images. Yeah, so sometimes moving images or sliding things onto a screen might be appropriate. So again, there's exceptions to all these rules, but generally you don't need to do those fancy twirling images onto the screen. Another thing, you guys are just hitting everything. Paragraphs without bullets. Yeah, this is as if we were writing a discussion post. We just plopped a whole paragraph into this slide. And we have to remember there's a difference between the goals of writing a discussion post or an essay and the goal of writing a PowerPoint or a presentation. Let me see if there was anything else. I think you guys covered most of it. I would say the images are kind of oddly placed. I'll mention that when I was creating this, I just started inserting text boxes and images kind of wherever they fit. And it ends up, like you said, being very busy. The great thing about PowerPoint is that there are templates and they already have beautiful designs, some very professional designed templates for you, where you can just type into the text boxes and usually they're automatically bullet pointed as well. And so you can find that there might be an easier area to add an image on the right hand if your writing is on the left hand, stuff like that. It's usually pretty natural if you're using those templates rather than trying to do this all manually. Again, each of these images, they might be related to the content of this slide, but it's almost like a puzzle. And if you are listening to a speaker give this information, you might be looking at the images, trying to decipher, how does this relate? What am I supposed to understand from looking at this? And that can be distracting and overwhelming as an audience member. So we want to always keep our audience in mind, no matter what we're writing. It's sometimes easier to think about that with presentations like this and think about, are these images necessary? Do they help my argument? Do they illustrate a point clearly? Things like that. Okay, so there's a lot of colors going on, all the things. So let's look at an example of a slide that's similar content and I would argue more effective. Feel free to type in the chat room what you notice if you want, but just things that are pretty obvious from the start. There's good contrast between the background color and the text. And I ended up using mostly black and white. I didn't intend to. It's not like you have to use no color. You can just try to limit the number of colors and how bright and kind of overwhelming colors can be. Let's see, I just picked one image, and to me, it clearly related to the content that I was trying to describe. That relationship between administration, kind of with the keyboard, and healthcare, the clinicians with, oh my goodness, the stethoscope, is that correct? I am really showing my lack of confidence here. Okay, great.
Got it, Julie.
That's great. So yes, this also a great thing about this is it uses levels to determine the outline even of this slide. So again, if you're using bullet points, you can kind of highlight, okay, there are three main things here, and we've got an example that we can read into. Visually, this just makes a lot more sense and it's easier to follow. If you have questions, you want someone to look at your PowerPoint and just get feedback, you can always submit a PowerPoint to the Writing Center as well. Okay, and I did not mean for that to circle around. That's something I would change about this one, I think. it carried over from the previous slide. Okay, as we're wrapping up, I do want to talk about writing speaker notes because that's another portion of writing or making presentations that has to do with writing very directly. So this is an important step if you're going to actually be presenting your slides for an audience or even for a video recording. And it may surprise you that you can actually talk for much longer than you think on each slide, even if it's just the previous slide with 3 main bullet points. If I didn't give myself speaker notes, I might go way long, or I might go way short and just read the bullet points verbatim. And writing speaker notes helps us find a middle ground and stay on track with the amount of time that we're trying to speak. So you can do this step, writing speaker notes before, during, or after you're making your slides. Again, for this webinar, as an example, I created the slides first, and then I went back through and I made speaker notes for myself for each slide to help me stay on track through the presentation and to be mindful of your time. I don't want to go way over an hour and make you stay or leave and miss something, right? So depending on the format of your presentation, you can type your notes directly in the speaker notes text box in PowerPoint. So that's a cool feature if you want to use that. You can also find what works for you. I'm just going to reveal everything about what I'm doing. And so I like to type them out in a separate document and actually print it out. So that just helps me. I have my script right here, and I'm not dealing with too many things on the screen. Whatever works for you. You might have it pulled up on an iPad or a second monitor for you to read. You might tape it on your wall, whatever works for you, again, to give you those notes for each slide. And you can give yourself even little pointers about when to transition to the next slide, things like that. So I want to go back just one more time about this. So the text on this slide, again, you could use this for a discussion post. It's the example we gave earlier, but this might be an example of speaker notes as well. You could read something like this, the whole paragraph as your speaker notes over this slide. It would be much more fleshed out than if I were to just read these bullet points, and easy to read and follow along, and it covers all of the information. So that's just one example. Again, hopefully that helps to just hear how someone else does it. Sometimes that helps me. So when you're actually making the presentation, there's a way to record it in PowerPoint itself. So you can do everything in PowerPoint now. It's pretty powerful. You can use Canvas Studio. There's resources about how to do that within your courses or at ACU's YouTube channel. And there's other methods. Do whatever you're directed to do. But if you are recording it, you're not giving it live via Zoom or something like that, make sure you watch and listen to the recording to ensure that your voice is clear and the recording didn't cut off at some point, and then you can submit. I want you to leave with a lot of resources, just knowing that you have these in your back pocket. So again, use PowerPoint's templates and use their design ideas. And each of these descriptive hyperlinks takes you to more information about how to do and make use of these things. So design ideas, it's a great way to mix up your slides so that it's not all one way. It's just kind of fun if you're interested. If you're interested in the accessibility webinar that I referred to, you can watch that for free online as well. If you are making a PowerPoint presentation and you're actually recording it in PowerPoint, Dr. Basil Considine in the ACU Online Writing Center has created a tutorial walking you through those steps. So if you're interested in doing that, watch that. It's on our YouTube channel and on our website. ACU's library has resources directly for healthcare administration students. So I've linked that for you here as you're doing your research. And of course, we have our APA paper template from the Writing Center, and you can download that, use it in Microsoft Word to write all of your papers, knowing that they're formatted in APA. And then, of course, our YouTube channel and our blog has more information if you're interested. A couple of upcoming webinars that you might want to mark your calendar for or RSVP if you're interested is Avoiding Plagiarism with APA 7th edition. That'll be next Tuesday. And then later on in September, Beyond Summary, Adding Analysis and Synthesis to Your Writing. These are two really great, widely applicable webinars. So I hope you'll be able to join us or watch the recording afterwards. And I'm just whizzing through all these resources. So don't feel like you have to remember all of these. Again, I'll post them on our website. But if you're interested in watching something now, you don't want to wait until the webinar, we've got a tutorial for Healthcare Administration 241. So if that's something coming up in your future, know that the week 7 paper in that course has a tutorial for you. And if you are interested in using Turnitin as a tool in your writing process before you submit it to your professors, you want to check it out and learn about avoiding plagiarism kind of on the front end. I highly recommend watching our video about that as well. So this concludes my part of the webinar. If you have anything else you wanted to add or ask, we have some time for that. You can email us again, onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu, if you have a question in the middle of the night that you forgot to ask. Schedule an appointment with us or visit the Writing Center. All right, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening. Take care.